You monster. Tell them where you hid her. My sister Olivia screamed, collapsing into my father's arms as the SWAT team dragged me out in handcuffs. She kidnapped my baby. I didn't fight. I just stared at her. Because exactly 24 hours ago she wasn't screaming. She was begging me to hide her daughter to cover up her own bruises. She thought she could frame the family scapegoat for a crime she committed. He was wrong. Watch closely because this is how I destroyed her perfect lie. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. It started exactly 24 hours before the raid. My cabin in the Smoky Mountains was supposed to be a place where the chaos of my family couldn't reach me. I had bought it with the advance from my last book, paid for in cash and silence. The only sounds were the wind in the pines and the scratch of my pen on paper. Then my phone rang. The screen flashed Olivia, and my stomach tightened with that familiar, conditioned dread. I almost didn't answer. I should have let it go to voicemail. But the conditioning runs deep. Ashley, thank God, Olivia screamed the moment I picked up. Her voice was pitched to a frequency of pure panic that I had heard 1,000 times before. It's Brandon. He collapsed. They think it's a heart attack. I'm following the ambulance to the hospital. I can't have Isabella see him like this. You have to take her. Please. You're the only one I trust. The logic was full of holes. Brandon was 34 and ran marathons. They had nannies, a housekeeper, a driver. Why drive 2 hours into the mountains to drop a child off with the sister you barely spoke to? But panic is a contagious disease and Olivia was patient zero. I told her yes. I always said yes. 2 hours later, a black SUV tore up my gravel driveway. Olivia jumped out not looking like a grieving wife, but like a woman running from a crime scene. She was perfectly made up, her designer dress spotless, but her eyes were wild. She pulled my 8-year-old niece, Isabella, from the backseat. Isabella didn't look at me. She stared at her shoes. It was mid-July, 90 degrees with humidity that clung to your skin like plastic wrap. But Isabella was wearing a thick, long-sleeved hoodie pulled tight around her face. When I reached out to take her hand, she flinched. A small, violent jerk of her shoulder as if she expected a blow. I saw a dark smudge on her wrist just peeking out from the sleeve. A bruise. Not a playground scrape, but the deep, purple mark of fingers. I should have asked right then. I should have demanded to see her arms. I should have called Brandon myself. But I didn't. And I need you to understand why. It wasn't because I was stupid. It was because I was trapped in the normalizing of cruelty. For 28 years, I had been the janitor of Olivia's life. When she wrecked her car in high school, I took the blame to save her insurance rates. When she stole money from our parents, I replaced it from my savings so she wouldn't get caught. I had been trained, systematically, to view her chaos as my responsibility. We call it being a good sister, but it's actually a survival mechanism. If I fixed the problem, the screaming stopped. If I asked questions, the screaming got worse. I looked at the bruise and my brain instantly rewrote the narrative. She fell. She's clumsy. Olivia is stressed. Don't make it worse. I was so desperate to keep the peace that I ignored the war being waged on a child's body. I viewed Isabella not as a victim, but as another mess I had to quietly clean up so the family show could go on. I was the designated fixer, and fixers don't ask why the floor is bloody. They just bleach it. So I took Isabella's hand gently. I let the lie slide down my throat like broken glass. Thank you, you're a lifesaver, Olivia said, already backing toward the driver's seat. I'll call you when we know more. Don't let her have sugar. And don't let her use the phone. 'Cause she's in shock. She sped off before the dust could even settle, leaving me standing in the silence of the mountains with a trembling child and a feeling in my gut that was colder than the winter wind. I took Isabella inside, made her hot chocolate despite the heat, and locked the door. I thought I was keeping the world out. I didn't realize I had just locked myself inside the frame-up. Isabella slept fitfully on the couch, whimpering in her dreams. I stayed up all night watching her, my phone on the coffee table like a dormant grenade. When the sun finally bled through the pines, I tried to call Olivia again. Straight to voicemail. I called Brandon. Straight to voicemail. I made pancakes, trying to create a sense of normalcy in the suffocating quiet of the cabin. Isabella sat at the table, staring at her plate. She hadn't spoken a word since she arrived. Every time I moved too quickly, she flinched. Then my phone lit up. But it wasn't Olivia calling to check on her traumatized child. It was a text from my mother, Susan. We always knew you were jealous, Ashley, but this? You're a monster. I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Before I could type a response, another one came through. This time from my father, David. Give her back. Don't make this worse than it already is. You're dead to us. I felt the room tilt. They weren't asking if Isabella was safe. They weren't asking what happened. They had skipped straight to condemnation. It was a whisper campaign that had turned into a scream before I even knew I was on trial. For 30 years, Olivia had been the sun and I had been the shadow. If Olivia said I was a monster, then to them I had claws and fangs. They didn't need proof. They just needed her word. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. I have to call them, I thought. I have to explain. That was when the windows rattled. Not from wind, but from the concussion of heavy vehicles on gravel. Blue and red lights washed over the cabin walls, turning my sanctuary into a crime scene. The next few minutes were a blur of violence and noise. The door crashing in. The shout of clear. The cold metal of handcuffs. But the moment that actually broke me wasn't the physical force. It was what happened when the detective, a man with eyes like flint, pulled out his phone and pressed play. A voice filled the room. My voice. I have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, wire $500,000 to the offshore account I sent. If you go to the police, I'll finish what I started. Don't test me, Olivia. The cadence, the pitch, the slight rasp I get when I'm tired. It was perfect. It was undeniable. It was me. But I had never said those words. I looked at the detective and I opened my mouth to scream, to deny it, to fight. But nothing came out. My throat closed up. My body went limp. I didn't fight as they hauled me up. I didn't thrash. I went silent. People think that when you're innocent you fight like a lion. You scream your truth until the walls shake. But that's not what happens when you're the family scapegoat. When you've spent a lifetime being told that your reality is wrong, that your feelings are invalid, and that you are the problem, your brain is wired differently. It's called the invisible chains of the survivor. When the collective finger of authority, my parents, my sister, the police, pointed at me and said, "You are the villain," a broken part of my brain simply accepted it. Not because I was guilty, but because it felt inevitable. Of course I was the villain. I was always the villain. The gaslighting had been so thorough, so decades long, that for a split second looking at that detective I wondered if I had done it and just forgotten. That is the true power of abuse. It doesn't just hurt you, it makes you doubt your own existence. So I let them drag me out past my screaming sister. I let them shove me into the cruiser. I sat in the dark, wrapped in the cold comfort of the inevitable, while the real monster stood weeping on my lawn, playing the role of a lifetime. The interrogation room was a sterile box of gray walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. It smelled of stale coffee and fear. Detective Miller sat across from me, laying out photographs on the metal table like a grotesque tarot reading. Photo 1. A neighbor's grainy cell phone picture of me helping Isabella out of Olivia's SUV. "Witnesses say you dragged the girl," Miller said, his voice flat. "That doesn't look like a hug to me, Ms. Vance." Photo 2. A close-up of Isabella's arm, purple and yellow with bruises. "The mother claims you inflicted these. Said you have a history of aggression when you don't get your way." Photo 3. A transcript of the deepfake call. $500,000. That's a lot of money for a children's book illustrator. What were you planning to buy? Or were you just jealous? He leaned forward, the chair scraping against the linoleum. "We're looking at aggravated kidnapping, extortion, and child abuse. In this state, that's a life sentence. No parole. You die in a cage, Ashley. Unless you tell me where the money was supposed to go." The words life sentence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in 24 hours, the fog in my brain cleared. The paralysis of the scapegoat shattered under the weight of the accusation. This wasn't just my family being mean. This wasn't just Olivia needing attention. This was a calculated architectural dismantling of my life. I looked at the photos again. The neighbor saw what they expected to see, a struggle. The bruises were real, but the timeline was wrong. And the money? $500,000 was exactly the amount of debt Olivia had racked up gambling online last year. I knew because she'd asked me for $10,000 to cover the interest, and like a fool, I'd given it to her. She wasn't just framing me. She was using me to extort her own husband. She'd probably told Brandon I took the girl, demanded the ransom from him, and planned to pay me, keeping the cash for herself while I went to prison. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was exactly something Olivia would do. I sat up straighter. The cold metal of the table bit into my forearms. "I want a lawyer," I said. My voice was raspy but steady. "And I want you to check the metadata on that recording. It's a deep fake." Miller smirked. "See? But right now your sister is crying in the lobby, your parents are giving statements about your unstable behavior, and your niece is too terrified to speak. You're alone, Ashley." He was wrong. I wasn't alone. I was just the only one in the room who knew the truth. Meanwhile, in the observation room next door, another drama was unfolding. I didn't know it then, but the secondary twist of my nightmare was sitting in a plastic chair, sweating through his expensive gym shirt. Kyle, Olivia's personal trainer. The man she'd been sleeping with for 6 months. Olivia had promised him $50,000 if he helped her scare Brandon into paying the ransom. All he had to do was drive the getaway car if things went south. But when the SWAT team arrived, Olivia hadn't protected him. As she screamed on the lawn, she'd leaned into a rookie officer and whispered, "He made me do it. That man Kyle, he's Ashley's boyfriend. They planned it together." Kyle had been brought in as an accomplice. He was sitting there listening to the officers discuss his charges: conspiracy, kidnapping. He realized with dawning horror that he wasn't the partner. He was the fall guy. Olivia was cutting loose ends and he was a loose end. He looked at the two-way mirror, then at his own reflection. He wasn't going to prison for a woman who would throw him under the bus to save her manicure. Kyle tried to negotiate with the police, insisting he had leverage. He hadn't just driven the car, he had recorded everything. On his phone was a video that would shatter Olivia's carefully crafted victim narrative. I was led not to a cell but into an observation room filled with staged grief. My mother sobbed, my father seethed, Brandon played the broken husband, and at the center sat Olivia, fragile and trembling. The moment she saw me, the act flipped. She screamed accusations, lunged forward, and painted me as a monster. Before I could speak, Detective Miller placed a laptop on the table. "We received new evidence," he said quietly. "From an accomplice. Kyle, it turned out, hadn't accused me. He had accused Olivia." The video played. Shot inside Olivia's SUV. It showed her doctoring Isabella's bruises with makeup, instructing her to cry and rehearse accusations so Brandon would pay. Isabella's small voice complied out of fear. The room went dead silent. Brandon stared at his wife in horror. Olivia panicked, claiming the footage was a deepfake. Miller shut that down with timestamps and verification. Then the door opened and Isabella walked in. Olivia tried to summon her with practiced sweetness. Instead, Isabella ran straight to me, clinging to my waist and whispering that her mother threatened to hurt her if she didn't lie. The illusion collapsed. Brandon took Olivia's phone from her hand. She finally screamed the truth: she'd done it for money. Miller arrested her on the spot. Our parents said nothing. For the first time, they saw the story they'd believed for decades crumble. Olivia was convicted and sentenced to 15 years. Brandon filed for divorce and signed over full custody of Isabella to me without a fight, along with a financial settlement for the damage done. My parents tried to reconcile. I gave them a permanent no-contact order instead. A year later, I live in the Smoky Mountains with Isabella. Using the settlement, I built an art therapy center for children recovering from narcissistic abuse. Isabella is 9 now, safe, loud, unafraid. Justice wasn't just prison. Justice was what we built after. If this story resonated with you, share it.